Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab. I am Dr. Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. We are still talking about the situation in Palestine at the moment, not just what's going on right now, but just the way life has been living in Palestine for decades now. We talked about how on the last episode, if we actually want to see peace, we need environmental justice. It has to happen. Without it, there will be no peace. And on this episode, I want to spend some time talking about the food situation, the food in Palestine, primarily the idea of food insecurity and food sovereignty and food apartheid. These words are phrases that we like to use to talk about how a population can actually feed themselves, what their access is like, and what life is like, just trying to make it day to day. And so there is a lot of issues surrounding food when you talk about Palestine. I mean, we're just coming off the heels of an attack that the Israeli army launched against a food aid truck and against people who were gathering to get aid in Gaza during this war. And we're seeing now how the government in Israel is using starvation, using their ability to restrict food access as a way of waging war in the territory. Is just a fact. We're seeing starvation on a mass scale, famine on a mass scale, children dying from malnutrition on a mass scale. And if we're not careful, we might think that this is all happening because of this war, because of this aggression in the Gaza Strip. But I just want to let you know that food insecurity, food apartheid, these things have been happening for decades in these territories. This did not just start with this conflict, with this war that's going on. This has been a problem for so long. And so we need to talk about that. We need to actually spend some time and talk through what it's like if you're a Palestinian to put together a full meal for your family, right? If you're a Palestinian, what do you do when you start to feel a little hungry? You wake up in the morning, it's time for breakfast. What do? You want to get some lunch? Where do you go? How is life in Palestine when it comes to food? And so I want to spend some time talking about that because it's not what you think. And it's been like this for a long time. And this current conflict, war, aggression, bombardment, however you describe it, isn't the cause of these problems. And when it ends, the problems will still be there. And so let's just talk some numbers real quick because I pulled up the information from the World Food Program because they are the primary number one largest contributor of food in the Palestinian territories, which, by the way, is already a problem. Like, just think about that. So most of us go to the store or go to a supermarket to buy food, or we go to some kind of convenience store for something real quick. But if you live in these Palestinian territories, you're relying on aid from the World Food Program to feed you on a daily basis because there's no economy, there's no employment, there's no way to sustain yourself without this intervention from this non governmental aid organization. That's how you're getting food. That's how you're getting fed each and every day. And if you were born after 48, 1967, all you've ever gotten was food from the World Food Program or from the UN relief agencies. You don't have the ability to do what you believe is necessary to feed yourself and your family. And that's the problem. And so when you read this report, I had the report in front of me. This is what it says. It says in Palestine, protracted conflict, economic stagnation, restricted trade, and access to resources, coupled with high unemployment and poverty rates, continue to pose serious challenges to the food security and nutrition situation. Let me translate that for you. An occupation by a foreign government who is committed to restricting your ability to live and thrive is why you can't get food on the table. That's the translation. They're being kind in this report because they have to be very, you know, cautious with how they describe things. But let's just be honest about it. These things are not happening by chance. These things aren't happening because the people who live in these territories don't know how to run their cities and their states and their governments. This is intentionally being placed on them by an outside government. In this case, we're talking about the government of Israel. That's what's happening. And that is why the situation is what it is. Here are the numbers. So, according to the needs assessment for the state of Palestine 2022, this is not because of the war. This is years before. This is the assessment. 1/3 of the Palestinian population are severely food insecure. So let me just give you some definitions. So we have people who are food secure, who are not concerned about where their food's going to come from. They have the ability and the access and the means to get it. You have people who suffer from low food insecurity, who are people who aren't quite sure how they're going to get their food. They don't know exactly where it's coming from, but they're able to find a way to eat. So they might not get as much as they need, or the nutrition isn't as strong as it should be, but they're finding ways to cope and to sustain themselves, even if it's in an unhealthy manner. So in the United States, people who are food insecure usually fall in this category, right? They're stuck in a place where there's no supermarket, there's no fresh markets. They have to buy canned foods and processed foods, and they have to go to these dollar stores and these little convenience stores to feed themselves and their families. And they go and they do it and they eat, but it's not healthy and it's not nutritional for them and their family. They're food insecure. They don't have access to anything that would be nutritious, only things that are not nutritious. Fine. Then you have severely food insecure, or people who suffer from high food insecurity. These are the people who not only don't have access, but who find themselves cutting the size of their meals, skipping meals, going days without food because they don't have not just access to healthy food, they don't have access to any food. They don't know when their food's coming. They don't know what they're going to eat. And so because of that, they are restricting their own diets so they can feed their kids, or they're not eating to try to hold on to food for another day, for another week, because you don't know. These people are these people are suffering from severe food insecurity. Now in the US, there's about I think the last numbers were 12% of people in America are food insecure, and I think about 5 or 6% are suffering from high food insecurity. In Palestine, this report says 33% are severely food insecure. Another report from the UN says that 45 to 50% of the people in Palestine are food insecure, just typical food insecurity. That's almost half the people that live there. That's what's going on. That's why it's so difficult for people who live there to sustain themselves and to sustain their families and to live a normal, healthy life. They can't get any food. That's why the World Food Program is that distributor, is the one who brings the food, because there's no other place to get it. And the question is why? Why is that? Why do we live in a world where half of a population is so severely food insecure that they have to rely consistently on the World Food Program to feed them? And the answer is simple. It's not that difficult. You might think it's a complex play with economic and social factors and geopolitical implications. No, it's not. It's really simple. One territory, the Gaza Strip, is blockaded off. They can't get any imports from anywhere. They can't get any resources from anywhere. They have no ability to do whatever they believe is necessary to live in that territory. Completely blockaded, completely blocked off from the world, land, air, and sea. The West Bank, the other Palestinian territory, is under occupation, which means that the Israeli government decides what goes in, what comes out, and what the people living there do and how they live and conduct themselves. So you hear these stories about farmers having their trees torn down and having their land taken by settlers, by government officials, by the military. You hear these stories about food convoys being unnecessarily checked and turned around and restricted in certain areas because they're carrying certain things that are deemed to be inappropriate to bring into the territory. You have all of these issues, right? I mean, in the West Bank, there's a huge separation wall that was meant to be built along the border between what's called Israel and what's called the West Bank. But they built that wall far into the West Bank. And so that farmland, that territory was cut off and basically controlled by the Israeli government. That's not good. When you think about things like your crops, your livestock, what you're trying to grow, if you're trying to sustain yourself off the land, you need that land to sustain yourself. You can't afford to have it taken away. You can't do anything like that. If you're trying to go to the store to buy food, well, that food will only get there if the government allows it in. And we know from reports, we know from the history that the Israeli government has no interest in allowing for free flowing import and exports, allowing for a vibrant economy, allowing for a vibrant agricultural environment where people can live and support themselves. They have no interest in that, just none at all. Because for most of its history, Palestine was known to be this amazing agricultural land. That's why everybody wanted the land. It was fertile, produced all kinds of crops, fruit, vegetables. The animals loved living there and grazing, and fish and seafood. All this stuff was coming from Palestine. It's a metropolis. It's just an amazing, fertile land in the middle of the world. And as Palestinians experience this domination and control from the Israeli government, all of that was taken away from them. All of those things are now restricted or they're under complete control from the Israeli government. And so we have to recognize that when we're talking about whatever you want to call it, if you're talking about conflicts, you're talking about aggression, you're talking about instability, insecurity, food is a big deal. It's a big part of that. Because what are you going to do if you can't feed your family, feed your children, feed the population? What happens when the World Food Program isn't supported financially by other actors? Because let's not forget, it's a charity. It's a humanitarian aid organization. It's not a company. It's not doing anything in the territory other than distributing food. And they've been reporting significant funding shortfalls over the last few years, right? In this report, it says that in August of 2023, this is before the October 7th attack, before this current conflict, before this current war in Gaza, only 40% of the people that needed food were getting fed by this program because there was not enough money to go around. They're saying that they need 43 million to continue to feed the people who need assistance. And that money has to come from other governments, other countries, other donors to keep the program going. And they say if they don't get that money, they're going to have to just stop altogether. And they can't continue to provide the assistance, which means the people in Palestine won't be fed. They won't have anything to eat because they're relying on this one organization that is relying on donations to provide food, which is not how it's supposed to go. That is not how you do things. And sure, every now and then, different countries have different conflicts. There are wars that break out. Then it compromises the food systems. And for a little bit of time, maybe months or years, you have difficulty getting food. The conflicts are ending. And then you restore the economy. People get back to work. And then you restore the food systems and the imports and exports. And you can start feeding people again. But in Palestine, that's not what's ever happened. That's never happened. They have consistently been forced to eat food that was donated to them. That's how they've survived, the vast majority of people. This is not a temporary situation because a war broke out, and when the war is over, we'll go back to our supermarkets, back to our farming, back to our way of life and supporting ourselves and our families. That's not what's going to happen. And we, especially in the West, especially out here in the United States, we have to know this. We have to recognize this. We have to be willing to fight for justice. In this case, it's food justice. We need to fight for food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is the ability of a people or a group to determine for themselves what they will eat, when they will eat, and the amount that they will be able to eat. They have control and autonomy over their eating habits and their food systems. We should be fighting for that in Palestine. They don't have that at all. And you're right. We need food security, of course. We need people to be fed and sustained nutritionally, absolutely. But ultimately, we need food sovereignty. Everybody has it. We have it in America. We have it in different states, different cities. Things come in and out. We have it. We need to extend it to more local communities, but we have it. They don't have it over there. They just don't. What they have is food apartheid. Food apartheid is a situation where you have very clear discriminatory actions taken against a certain group that restricts their access to food and other systems that provide that value. You created a two-tiered system. So I can look at you and know that if you're one thing, you'll get all that you need. If you're another thing, you won't have anything you need because the system has been set up to privilege one over the other. And in Palestine, it's clear what's going on. Palestinians are second class in so many different ways, but especially when it comes to food, you don't get opportunities to have what you need. If you're Israeli, if you're a settler, if you are in the military, if you live in Israel as an Israeli citizen, you have no problems at all getting whatever you need whenever you need it. And that's fine. That should be extended to everybody. We should all have the equal access and equal opportunity to eat and live in accordance to how we believe we should be eating and living. That's what should be happening. We shouldn't have a situation where we have this two-tiered, three-tiered system where some people get what they need to eat, some of us are struggling, and some of us have to rely on food aid from the World Food Program every day to feed everyone in our family. That shouldn't happen. And so don't just look at the news today, see the bombings and see the humanitarian aid trucks not getting in and see the bombings of the areas where they're trying to get food aid and they're not allowing people to get it and think to yourself, well, once this war ends, those trucks will get in and everything will be fine. We'll get the food and the water and electricity and things will be back to the way they should have been and we'll be good to go. It's not true. It's not true. What is true is that the only thing that will happen is we'll go back to how things were last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, which is, at least in the Gaza Strip, a full blockade and severe food restrictions. And in the West Bank, continued food apartheid. That's what you'll have. And until somebody steps up, until we say something, that's what we'll continue to have. And so I just want to spend a little bit of time to just let you know that when it comes to food, if you're in Palestine, it's extremely hard to get. And for those of us who are fortunate enough to have access to whatever we want to eat, whenever we want to eat it, we should be speaking up and speaking out about how important it is that other people have that same opportunity. And whatever the reason is for why they don't, we should be strongly insistent that those things change so that food insecurity and food apartheid and food injustice isn't the legacy that's left in these areas. I don't want to be 70, 80 years old and still watching the news and still seeing babies and small children and young adults starving to death in Palestine because we haven't done anything to change the situation. And like I said before, I'm not advocating for any particular specific political settlement or solution or arrangement. I can't talk about those kind of things. I don't know enough about what it would look like to do that. All I can tell you is there is a very strong discrepancy and a very huge gap between what people in Palestine have and what they need. And we should be on the side of those who are helping to get them what they need and to remove any barriers that restrict that. That's what we should be doing. And when you advocate, that's how you advocate. We want equality, equity, equal access, equal rights, equal everything. However you want to make that happen, you can make it happen. But that's what we really want. We don't want to have any particular specific arrangement that we can all point to and say, look at how. No, if it doesn't lead to equal rights and equal access, I don't want it. I don't want it. I want everybody to be able to eat whatever they need to eat to stay healthy and to have the access that they need to feed their families. I want that here in the United States. I want it here in Europe. I want it in Palestine as well. And so let's work toward that end. Let's educate ourselves and let's advocate in ways that highlight and bring awareness to the realities of this food insecurity and this food injustice that we keep seeing on television, and demand something different and something better than this. It doesn't have to be this way. And so I hope that we all do that. Educate yourselves and advocate for others. Let's do it. Thanks for listening. As always, to this episode of the Environmental Justice Lab, where we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.